All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let me begin first by saying that we apologize for the inconvenience with the confusion with the time. The clock has changed in Europe and in Palestine, so that might have confused our friends in North America. But thank you so much for joining us this session. Let me go over some housekeeping rules before we start the presentation, the talk. This session is recorded, so if you want to be anonymous or turn your camera off, now is the time to do so. Throughout the session, you will be muted. However, if you have any questions, I will try my best to answer them, to ask them on your behalf. And please remain sensitive throughout the session in your comments on the chat. With that being said, I will go briefly over the program of today. So we will first have a presentation, a talk about anti-Semitism that will be led by Professor Slabotsky. Then in the last 20-15 minutes of the session, we will have some time for some Kumi action that we have prepared for this week. And it would be helpful if you have the newsletter that was sent to you by email to see what the Kumi action is. And that will be led by one of the Sabil team. And of course, I forgot to mention that we will have some Q&A time after the presentation has been done. With that being said, let me introduce our speaker. So Professor Slabotsky is a social theorist who teaches decolonial Jewish thought, Muslim-Jewish relations, and cross-cultural liberation theologies at the summer school in Granada. Trained in academic institutions and the rabbinical seminary, he currently holds the Florence and Robert Kaufman Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies in the School of Government, Public Policy, and International Affairs at Hofstra University in New York. In addition, he is a co-director of the journal Decolonial Horizons, housed in Latin America and published by Pluto Journals. He's a co-chair of the Liberation Theologies Unit at the American Academy of Religion and an author of a seminal work. The book is called Decolonial Judaism, Triumphal Failures of Barbaric Thinking. Thank you, Professor Slabotsky, for joining us today and being willing to share with us on this important topic of anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much, Samuel. First of all, thank everyone for actually coming here and be able to engage with each other in these very trying times. It's always easier to actually engage with each other when it seems to be a little bit of peace out there, even though peace sometimes cannot be true. But during this time, it's particularly hard. This is why it's particularly important to engage with each other. So I want to thank Samuel. I want to thank all the civil team and all of you for being here. I am sure you haven't noticed at all, but I cannot have a very light accent. So instead of making you guess what I'm trying to say, I brought for you some subtitles. Okay, so hopefully you can see subtitles now. Yes, everyone can see it. Wonderful. So let me start a little bit about talking about what I am going to be talking today. I am going to be talking about some fabrications that have made us think that something is natural when it's not. And particularly, I want to talk about Palestine and the Arab-Jewish allegedly eternal enmity. Let me just ask you to take a look at these pictures. This is a way that what is called the conflict is presented today. And the question is why? And the question is whether or not this is the only way to present it. This is why I want to engage with a few questions today together. The first question is this fight eternal from biblical times? If there are two clear sides, who gets to represent each one and why? Does Zionism represent all Jews? Is Zionism the only Jewish political project? Why we call Palestinian violence terrorism and Israeli violence national defense. Are there only two sides, or there is one side that occludes, that hides itself because it's too big to be seen? And finally, I am going to ask what is the responsibility of the West, of Western activists and Western Christians with what has been called as a conflict. The conclusions we are going to arrive are the following. The Jewish Arab or Jewish Muslim, depending on the time, enmity is not eternal. It's encamped from biblical times. It has only between 70 and 170 years. Historically, makes much more sense to talk about a Judeo-Islamic than a Judeo-Christian traditions. Zionism is one Jewish political project, not the only one, and was not supported by the majority of Jews until after 1967. Actions of pacification of the Christian West are not salvific, but structurally might have been the cause of the problem. Western interventions are necessary, but should account for the fact that they are not neutral actors, intervening to bring peace to two eternal enemies. And more times than not, the Christian West is a side that is too big to be seen, and further balance the conflict with discursive power and financial aid. And I want you to take a look at the last picture out there and see what happens when someone believes that has the recipe for universal solutions. Someone said, they say, put your plan for world peace on the table. So I did, showing all this fried bacon. If the Christian West is trying to implement this solution among Muslims and Jews, they are going to have a problem. There is no universal solutions. And we can actually think that the problems might be universal, but the solutions need to be local. So let me start a little bit from 1482. Why I start on this year? This is a moment of two major conquests. First of all, Christians take over the Iberian Peninsula and expel Muslims and Jews. And they also conquer the Americas, starting a genocide against natives and a kidnapping of people born in Africa and being made into slaves. This is a moment in which the West starts being a global power that will conquer most of the world, including Palestine from the Ottoman Empire, and set in motion what I would say a program they have today. From the resources that the West exhibit from these two conquests, Europe and later on the US will pass from being a local contender to a global power that by 1914 will have occupied over 80% of the world and influenced the whole world. And the question is, how a population that was never more than 8% of the world occupied 80% of the world and influenced the 100? I would just say that this happened because of resources and collaboration, but also not just by physical power, but also by changing how people think. And to do this, we need to engage a little bit with Christian theology. Starting in the 17th century, the world was divided in three. The people that was defined as having true religion were Christianity. This community has been presented as endowed with the ultimate truth that must bring the world to religious salvation, and later on cultural civilization, economic development, and political democratization. As such, any act of violence is going to be considered redemptive. And when there are accidents, they were going to be considered collateral damage. Some people who are going to consider having false religions, those communities who are going to be defined as having the wrong path, that have consciously rejected or betrayed ultimate truth, and are either stuck in time or actively working against civilization with open war or conspiracies. As such, their violence is going to be considered terrorist. And finally, some people being defined, not because they didn't have, but being defined as having no religion, these people are going to be presented as people who fell off the Christian map and can only be part of global history with encounter with number one, with the true religion of Christianity. The resources from land to labor are going to be seen as reaching territories to fulfill the divine election, and the violence is going to be presented as ignorance, as limited understanding of the role that Christianity, and later on Europe, and later on civilization, place in the world states. What happened then? Before 1492, the point is that Jews were living among Arabs and later on Muslims, some Arabs, some not, for 2,500 years to 700 years from Iraq to the Levant to North Africa. Jews were living much better under Islam than under Christianity because they have a clear protected legal status. They were people of the book. In the 15th, 16th century, there was a simultaneous exchange. While Jews and Muslims were expelled from Christian Spain, Turks, a little bit before, were going to take over Constantinople or Istanbul. Between the 16th and 18th century, Jewish population in the Ottoman Empire multiplied by 8 times. Why? Because all Jews who were suffering in Christian lands, they moved to Muslim lands. If Jews and Muslims have been hating each other for biblical times, why so many Jews wanted to live in Muslim lands? Something of this idea of eternal hatred just doesn't work. Even more, between the 18th and 20th century, Arabs who underrepresent Islam and Jews were actually co-racialized by the Christian West. Jews were called by luminaries of Western thinking as having Oriental spirit, Hegel, being a Palestinian race, Kant, being Asiatic refugees, Herder, or being Semitic barbarians, Hume. This is why Palestinian Christian Edward Said writes that antisemitism, and as I have discussed in Islamic branch Orientalism, resemble each other very closely in historical, cultural, political truths that is only to be mentioned to a Palestinian for its irony to be perfectly understood. From Muslim Spain to Berber Muslim Maghreb or North Africa to Ottoman Empire, Muslim lands served as refugee for persecuted Jews. So the idea that Jews and Muslims hate each other for a long time, it just doesn't work. It is true, Jews were not a first-class citizens. By the way, in the empire, very few were first-class citizens. They were people of the book, and as such, they have some privileges and some have some limitations. But if you find in the records, Jews belong to every level of society, from high doctors to the sultans to farmers. That helps us to understand that Jews, under Islamic rule, they were integrated into all the levels of the Ottoman society. So what changed? Is Muslims and Jews have lived next to each other for such a long time. What changed? Something happened in the first decades of the 19th and later 20th century that will actually create this eternal enmity between Jews and Muslims. In the 19th century, around the 1820s, 1830s, the West are going to start to colonize North Africa and later on the Middle East. And they practice a very common strategy of dividing the population. How they did that? They raised some elites against the majority of the population in order to help them to rule since they were a minority. This happened with Jews in North Africa, but not only. It happened with Christian Copts in Egypt, happened with Tutsis in Rwanda, happened even among certain native communities in also the Americas. And as such, there was a first small break in which the enmity between Christians and Muslims was created by a colonial Christian West. Even in the 20th century, this break was not complete. And I will actually argue that actually this hasn't happened until the Al-Nakba in 1948 and the Middle East crisis in 1956. Until the 1940s, Jews did have many political projects and not only Zionism. We know in the West that many Jews were engaged with what we call socialist or anarchist projects, especially internationalist projects. But in the Arab world, they were engaged with decolonization, they were engaged with international revolution. Let me give you some examples. In Egypt, a Jew, Yaakov Sanua, there's a misspelling there, is Sanua or Abu Nadara, in the 1880s proclaimed Egypt for Egyptians. If Jews were not considered Egyptians, while he will coin the slogan. In Morocco, during especially the a little bit before and after the Second World War, who will become the Sultan Mohammed V is going to be called for a Muslim Jewish Berber national movement in Morocco against colonization. If Jews were considered Westerners, if Jews were considered allies natural allies to Western Christianity, why Mohammed V is going to be called that? In Iraq, this has been a very ancient community since the exile in Babylon, pre-Islamic, and they were invaded by the culture and politics of what is called Arab Judaism. Even more, we go to Europe and the case of Albania. During the Second World War, when most of the Christian places are going to be left with a small percentage of Jews, in Albania, Jews were multiplied by 5 times. Albania is one of the few Muslims enclaves still in Europe. Jews escaping from extermination in Germany, Poland, Austria, and Serbia found refuge among Muslim families. While it is true they were a small number, it is one of the many examples that the bond between Muslims and Jews was not broken until the 1940s. So the project that generated this idea of eternal hatred between Muslims and Jews is less than 200 years. And the naturalization happened only 70 years ago. It's not eternal. It is an aftermath of colonial fabrication from North Africa to the Middle East to the West. So now I want to reimagine how to reimagine a new relation between Arabs and Jews, between Jews and Muslims, between Jews and Arabs, between Muslims and Jews, that take into account the responsibilities such as colonization, negation, oppression of Palestinians, but actually remembers this story. So why the break happened? After the Holocaust, in order to assess its guilt, the West will use some of its former victims to continue the same dispossession. So it's going to construct a new idea of a Judeo-Christian tradition that, by the way, originally was an anti-Semitic term, occluding the Judeo-Islamic tradition. Israel will uproot most of Jews from the dangerous Balkans, Maghreb, and the Middle East, will, as we know, expel Palestinians from their land in Palestine, and eventually put them, some of them under colonial military regime, and also bring these Jews who have been uprooted, these Arab Jews, and present them and set them as second-class citizens of the Jewish state. The point here is that there is an invention here. There is a fabrication. There is something we give for natural, but it's not. Imperial powers not only created the division, but also now present themselves as arbitrators. They are not just 2 sides. They are at least 3. And one of them, the Christian West, is a side that is too big to be seen. How unfold politically? In 1956, we are going to have a major crisis where Israel is going to ally itself with Western powers against Egypt and Palestine. That will provoke an exodus of Jews from North Africa. In 1967, there is going to be narratives of a new Holocaust that made Jewish youth in the US and later worldwide support the Jewish state, that they were not completely interested to support that before. And between the 1970s and 1990s, in the Cold War context, there is going to start to be a new consensus. Israel is going to represent the redemptive Western defense, and Palestine is going to represent terrorism. And this was supported by heavily institutionalization. Between the 2000s and today, I would say until a few weeks ago, it seems that the Jewish youth was starting to wake up. There were major movements from the traditional JVP to new groups like If Not Now or Choosing Our Terms, who are going to understand that the historical commitment of Jews should be with Palestinians and not with the State of Israel. The State of Israel was one Jewish political project, but not the only one. Unfortunately, in the last 3 weeks, we might see a return to the old discourse of Israel representing civilization and all Palestinians, doesn't matter of their actions or not, they represent barbarism. And the last 2 slides I will share with you. First of all, I want to talk about some paradoxes here. The first paradox about Muslims and or Arabs, because the West has been changing one entity and the other. Can be Arab Christians, can be Muslims, Arabs, but depending on the time. The Muslims are portrayed today as intolerant fanatics, barbarians, when historical relation with Jews shows actually the opposite. It's interesting to think that Palestinians are negating sovereignty when in the past, Muslim rule was the guarantee of Jewish life, in opposition to the duress were Jews under Christianity. Jews like myself, even coming from Latin America, we are naturalized as Western Judeo-Christians when we find in Palestine reproducing the same project that annihilated us. This doesn't mean I am making an equivalence between the Holocaust and Nakba. All historical events have specificities, but there is an overlapping between the Holocaust and Nakba. Both of them are projects of Western modernity that through terrorism of the nation state are trying to annihilate and commit a genocide against people. Finally, the Christian West. The cause of the conflict is presented, Christian West, that was the originator of the conflict, is presented as the only rational actor, the moderator, the one in charge with the solution. Just think about this eternal paradox. The one that caused the problem now thinks that needs to do something to solve it. Christian Palestinians generally are only recognized as actors to be saved, not as when they are not negated, not as actors of the process, which much more in common with Muslim Palestinians than with Western Christians. So I want to have with you just a few conclusions, some lessons, and finish with this. The problem in Palestine-Israel is not the eternal hatred between Jews and Muslims for biblical times. That is a reification. That is naturalization made by colonial fabrication following European and American geopolitical intervention. And the incorporation of Jews, the very recent incorporation of Jews to the process of a post-Holocaust Judeo-Christian tradition. This has only 70 years of age, no more, no less. How this history that shows of this Judeo-Islamic and Judeo-Arab tradition can change our perception of what is at stake in the Palestinian struggle, not being against Jews, but against a particular Western project that arrogates Jewish universal representation perpetrated against Palestinians. I want to repeat this. Zionism, the struggle against Zionism is not a struggle against Jews. It's against a particular Western project that arrogates itself Jewish universal representation perpetrated against Palestinians. Third, Western intervention is not pacific or neutral. Sometimes it is the cause of the problem, and a society is too big to be seen. Given its power, it is necessary, and I will encourage you to act. I want you to act, but also I want you to think when we are acting about those history and don't claim objectivity. The sides will not be and should not be about identities. Western Christianity has arrogated itself the superiority of the right path. And actually, that is the cause and not the solution for the problem. I want us to think not about public policy, not about the geopolitics of the Christian West, that they're always going to have a different kind of intention, but look about what grassroots movements are doing in order to commit to a different solution that takes into account values and not just geopolitical interests. So with this, I just want to close my presentation. Thank all of you for your patience, and I am truly looking forward to your questions and our conversation.
Professor Slabodski, thank you so much. That was so important, I think, for myself, and I'm assuming for others, to understand that when we're calling for a ceasefire, it's not only through missiles, but it's also thinking and ideologies and the way we portray the narratives and the way we need to unlearn certain concepts and certain narrations. I am asking for the attendees here, if you have any questions, I will try my best to ask them on the chat, so please do so now. But as I am the moderator, I will take my privilege to ask the first question. You mentioned grassroots movements. We are witnessing Jewish Voice for Peace. We are witnessing various grassroots movements amongst Jews who are advocating for decolonization, for justice for Palestine. Can you speak a bit more about those grassroots movements? What significance do they bring beyond, as you said, the geopolitical side of it?
Thank you so much, Samuel, for this. Let me just write in the text two concepts that I want to depart from. Everyone can see those two concepts? Okay. This is a distinction that a decolonialist semiologist, Walter Mignolo, has presented. And let me just tell you what is the difference in one and the other. Identity politics is when a particular community has a grievance, and that grievance needs to present itself defending their own people. And I think that some regards, in some times, that is very necessary. Today, Palestinians should fight for the grievances they have, absolutely. But there is another time where some kind of different identities can portray their own identity and bring it to politics, not defending their identity, but defending their values. And this is why, in the context of Palestine, someone like me, a Jew from Latin America, is going to be doing. And now I'm going to grassroots movements to explain someone. I want to think about the movements that Samuel was speaking about. And they are very, very diverse. Jewish Voice for Peace have a very, very traditional, I would say, not traditional, this is not the right word, a very long-standing commitment that we all know about. And you have, on the other hand, if not now, that is a diverse group of millennial young people who are coming with different ideas. I agree with some, I don't agree with others, okay? And from that spectrum, you have a lot of groups in between. And I just think what is interesting of these people is that they are bringing their identity into politics. They are mobilizing who they are, perhaps for what it is believed is not a Jewish cause or a Christian cause or whatever. And I want to interpret, I'm sorry for doing that, but I am a professor, so this is how I do interpret things, okay? These movements as identity in politics. Those who have understood that identity is not limiting from your possibility of action, but identity informs your action, but you need to act according to values. And that means that sometimes you are going to agree with the normative representation of your people, and sometimes you are going to disagree big time. If you are like me, you are going to disagree most of the time, but this is something I might talk to a therapist, not to all of you. So the point here is to make this distinction many times is being erased. Communities shouldn't leave behind their identity in order to engage in real struggle. One of the major problems of modern thinking is they divorce mind and experience, as if we all need to think the same way, independently if you are a Palestinian from Jerusalem or you are an American Christian from New York. The same. Objective things. I say, no. We all come from different experiences. We all come from different structures. We think differently, but we can think with each other. So I believe the grassroots movements are, or were until very recently, and I believe something is changing, you know. Until very recently, they were growing and growing among especially the Jewish youth. I was 3 or 4 years ago in a lecture organized by a very conservative Jewish magazine. And there were 2 people talking to each other. They were very, very, very hardcore normative Jews, you know. And one of the other said, these kids who are anti-Zionists, we should just denounce them and, you know, like that. And the other person who was very, very strongly say, well, wait a second, you are talking about my stepdaughter. So you have in this debate, these old-style normative Jews having said, well, wait a second, okay, my stepdaughter is struggling with all her forces for what she believes. I don't want to raise her. So you will start to see some breaks, what I call cracks of the system. The system touches everything, but it's never complete, it's never hermetic. Until very recently, until 3 weeks ago, I would say, these cracks were happening everywhere. I will just say that things are changing. I am seeing that this course of 1967, the idea that Jews, a new Holocaust is coming, Jews are the powerless of the world, we have a solidarity with everyone, but now it's solidarity with us. That discourse is that they are historically inaccurate, their naturalization of reification of history, they are coming back. What is going to happen? I don't know. As a prophet, I am a very good professor. Okay, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future, absolutely no idea. And every time, if I tell you to bet for a number in the lottery, please bet for the other one, because I always really bad on this, okay? But so I don't know what's going to happen, but I can detect certain movements of discourse. And I believe that I was very positive of what was happening of these communities and in politics until very recently. And now I am a little bit more concerned.
I definitely see the links between the discourse of what happened in October 7th and in 2003. That same kind of dichotomy, even 67 and beyond, you know, it's still in place. And I think that's why it's even more important to have these kind of conversations. So identity politics, identity in politics. How do Westerners, or I'll read out the question. What role do you really realistically see for the West? It's never been an honest broker, neither losing sight of their own interests, such as oil. Israel is used by the US to continue control in the region. So how would you see the role of the West currently? What can they do?
So, as I told you before, nobody thinking from space. We all think where we are. And I am coming from Latin America, an area that has been used and reused by US foreign policy, once and again, as many of you know. And once they asked an Uruguayan thinker I really like very much, Eduardo Galeano, who is the author of The Open Veins of Latin America, they asked, if you can talk to US presidents, what you will ask them? And the answer was, please stay away. I am also sure that the answer for Latin America is the same answer we should have for Palestine-Israel. Not so sure about that, okay? Things need to be translated, adapted to different circumstances. I just think we can extrapolate a bit more the American structure more in the Latin American Israel-Palestine. But there is something about, someone was talking before, sorry, I couldn't read very well about humility. I would like to have geopolitical humility, understanding that the West can act, should act, but the West is acting. And as such, acknowledging what the West has done and the limitations is a first step. I'm sorry for being very negative right now, but it's hard to be positive. I do not see much constructive actions from the West at the level of government, at the level of policy, at the level of Congress. At the level, I don't see anything there. From grassroots movements, it's a different story, because we have been creating transnational grassroots movements for a long time, and we should continue. But at the level of government, I would just say I am not very positive. And I would just say, I will just go with Galeano to stay away. Not because I think they will, but at least they will think twice what they are doing. And they will do it anyway, but at least they will think about it.
Thank you. There's another question that says, can you explain these two terms? You use normative Jews and Jewish universal representation.
Very wonderful. So thank you so much. Now I'm seeing the question. So thank you, Elliot. I know. Can you raise your hand, Elliot? So I see you. Okay, I don't see you now, but well, Elliot, thank you so much for that question. So what I talk about normative Jews is the way that that the West present Jews and the Jews that somehow have the authority of representation of global jury. Most of the time in Jewish history, that representation had to do with the place where Jews had the most power. So at some point might have been what is Palestine. Another point was Babylon. Another point Rome. Another point Spain. Another point France. Another point now the US. So normative Jewry is the community who has the power to represent their community as the global community. This is what I would call normative Jews. We Latin American Jews, we were never there, and probably will never be there, okay? But so that present people outside the center as having more possibilities of interrogating issues. That doesn't mean that North American Jews will not interrogate, that doesn't mean that American Jews will interrogate, but it means about potentialities. So normative Jews is the people who have the power of representation. Zionism today is the normative Jewish political project. But there are many political projects that are not normative, but exist. And Jewish universal representation has to do with normative Jewry. It has to do with when we think about the Jew, what we think about. Okay, and I'll say the Jew as well, because the Jew is a construction that, of course, anti-Semitism has used, but it's not a real person. Okay, when we think about the Palestinian, the Jew, it's about a social construction being made for political reasons, always political reasons. So what construction is being made of Jewish universal representation today? And I think this representation is not something I myself, an Argentinian Jew, feel comfortable with. This is part of my work on confronting these discourses. But we cannot say in a very liberal way, well, there are many people who are very different. Yes, but not everyone has the power to say, I represent X, I represent Y. So Jewish universal representation will be that portrayal that has the most power. Today, being a Christian universal representation is being Western. So, but what happened with Chinese Christians? What happened with Middle Eastern Christians? Well, but yeah, there are other stuff, but they are not the universal representation. The universal Christian representation today are Western Christians. It's a problem, but we cannot say there are many Christians. No. There is one Christianity that has the most power, and there are other ones that need to struggle for some representation. Makes sense? This is what I meant. Hopefully, Elliot my answer was good enough.
I guess I don't think I'll be able to ask all of the questions in the chat. And I'm going to quickly ask the last question that I'm very, very interested in thinking. So one thing that I took from your presentation is that what is happening within Palestine-Israel is part of a larger paradigm, a much bigger matrix, so to say. What language then, and what ways can we as transnational decolonial movements have in order to tackle this matrix, to disrupt it? How can we have a joint language? Should we have a joint language, or is it a mosaic for a transnational movement?
Thank you, Samuel, for this question. I am afraid of giving one single answer because there is not. And those who bring you that universal answer, I think there are problems. But we can see some elements that can help us to understand the situation. I believe that the revolution is going to be made by those who have nothing to lose but their chains. And as such, transnational movements should be led by the people who are actually suffering, not only because their values are betrayed, but also their lives, but also their even existence is being threatened. If we want a decolonial Christian movement for Palestine, needs to be led by Christian Palestinians. And we all, the others, need to follow suit. If the same thing is when the Black Lives Matter movement exploded here, the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black Lives, was exceptional, not only for solidarity with Palestine, which was wonderful, but also because they were very ample. They were calling everyone to join, very different from other movements, but still need to be led by people who are suffering anti-Black discrimination, anti-Black racism every day. This is why I believe that what common language, the language Palestinian Christians think is necessary, or Palestinians. In the same way, I would say the struggle against anti-Black racism is going to be the actual language that is set by. Let's not confuse ownership with participation. It is necessary that the leadership is going to be done for those who suffer this racism every day. And the language should emerge from there. Myself, as a Latin American Jew, I am going to learn from Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, and others. This is not my role to set which language will be there or not. Now, if we talk about Latin America, it's a different story, okay? And this is how this nourishing can help each other. But I believe it is very, very important to understand that the leadership should be in those who are suffering the racism, the occupation, and they are threatened with genocide. I say very threatened by genocide, and I even wonder if I should use the word threatened now, or we are already passed to a different level, okay, every day. And these are the ones who should set that common vocabulary. And some of that, I will not like it. Believe me, I hate the idea that people that argue to represent me are committing a genocide. I hate to use the term, but this is what the grassroots organization in Palestine are saying is happening. And as such, we need to follow the vocabulary of those who are suffering this every day. And the transnational movement is going to be done with the leadership of those who are suffering the process.
Thank you so much, Professor Slabotsky, for the presentation and the really informative Q&A. So many people have been asking for your slides, and I will hold accountable that you will share them to me, and we'll be able to share them with everyone here on email. Moreover, there will be a video recording of this session, so you can always go through it. I need go through this session again. So thank you so much, Professor Slabotsky. We really appreciate you coming and giving your time to give us this important presentation. I will now, I don't know if Omar is here. I will now let Omar lead us within our Kumi action of this week.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you all for being with us today. Today has been also another difficult day. On average, 800 Palestinians are dying. That's the average. That's almost more than, that's higher than how many Palestinians have died during the first Intifada on the span of 7 years. Every 2 days or 3 days, we have more people dying than during the second Intifada. Israel just bombed a highly populated location in Jabalia camp. Already there's over 400 confirmed people who have died, and they expect other hundreds to be under the rubble, mainly children and women. So we appreciate everybody to continue doing what you're doing. We know that most of the audience here are already committed members who are working for justice and peace in Palestine and Israel. We're all trying to put this insanity to an end. We're trying to put common sense into the minds of the decision makers, which seems to be a job impossible. Israel is acting very childish. Harassments are taking place on a daily level. Palestinians are being beaten up on a daily basis, wrapped with the Israeli flag, taking videos of them. Palestinian children are being arrested. Hundreds of Palestinian prisoners on a daily rate are being arrested, kidnapped from their homes. What happened on October 7th is terrible. It's sad. Many innocent lives died. But since October 7th, it has been also hell in the Palestinian territories. And women and children who had nothing to do with October 7th are paying a price. And the world is waiting for Israel to calm down by itself. Today, they bombed also a very big center, which was built 2 years ago by the Orthodox community, a cultural center in Gaza, and it has turned into rubble. It's very difficult to be to feel hopeful these days. I saw our friend Daryl, who has shared on the chat that our good friend Dr. Nadra Kovorkian, who's part of the faculty of the Hebrew University, she signed a petition that was asking for, that was demanding a ceasefire, and she was laid off from the Hebrew University. So Ryan, if you're able to share that the actions, share screen. We'd like you to send 2 emails mainly today. And not only this, encourage others in your network to send emails. Emails are powerful. They show that that people care, people know, and people are watching, so that we can hold people accountable. So almost a week ago, Palestinian Christians, theologians, activists, and Christian organizations signed a letter, which is located on Change. It is already, it's on the website of Sabil and Fazna, but we're going to put a link on it on the chat. And this website, and it's a petition asking our church leaders, whoever your church leader is, to respond to the call of Palestinian Christians who believe that most of the Western churches sadly are being silent or complicit with the attacks on Palestine in Gaza. We want church leaders to speak for an urgent ceasefire, whether it is temporary, whether it is permanent. We need a ceasefire now. We need to stop the insanity and the loss of lives as much as we can. So please amplify your voices and push your church leaders to speak openly and demand a temporary or a permanent ceasefire. As simple as this. And please ask your church leaders to respond to the call of Palestinian Christians who are asking. In 1948, Palestinian liberation theology started because we were confused. The Bible was used to justify our oppression. In 1948, there was no Palestinian theologians, there was no Palestinian institutes, and we were overwhelmed, and we were allowed, and we couldn't do anything to the bullying of our brothers and sisters as they bullied us using theology and using the word of God. 2023, it has changed. We're able to respond, we're able to ask, and to look church leaders in their eyes and say, this is unacceptable. So please push church leaders, Christian organizations to respond to the call of Palestinian Christians. We've already sent the action by email during the newsletter. If you're not receiving it, you can sign the petition. It is already here on the chat. So please, if you haven't signed it already, please do. And if you're able to share it with others to sign it, please have people to sign it and to send it. So we will give you a few minutes to send the emails to your church leaders. If you know them, it could be any church leader within your community or any religious member within your community, to ask them to respond to the call of Palestinian Christians. Sadly, we've sent out the letter. It has been signed by hundreds or thousands of people. And sadly, we haven't received any response. If you are people who do not belong to our to a faith community, if you're secular, if you're outside the monotheistic religions, traditions, if you are part of a different faith, brothers and sisters, for us, we encourage you to amplify our voice and send our request to any church leader or neighboring church that you that is within your community or in your country. We appreciate your solidarity and helping us to work together. I appreciate people don't share on the chat and to keep the space now for sending the messages for the activism, because we might overwhelm the chat. We will allow people to share later on. I am also sharing the names. Asher Cohen, who is the president of the Hebrew University, and Tamir Schaefer, who is also the rector. So please, of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, we ask you to send letters condemning their actions against Nadira Kevorkian. So please, friends, in your support and your solidarity, send emails to Asher Cohen, also to the Hebrew University. Their actions against our friend and colleague Nadira Kevorkian is unacceptable. Please, friends, we encourage you to use these two actions, not only today, but also throughout the week. Push people to keep sending messages, emails, whether they are church members, friends, family members, people within your community. Let us all be pushing together for people to do these actions. As simple as sending an email is part of putting pressure on the decision makers, letting the people know that we are aware, we know, and we refuse to remain silent. Thank you.
All right. I think This session will be in a closing, but I would recommend that if you haven't had enough time to write the emails or sign the petitions, you can always do so after the session is done. We thank you for your solidarity. And just a few notices before we finish the session. For those interested in the Sabil Thursday services, we will have a reflection led by Reverend Fadi Diab. He serves at the St. Andrew's Church in Ramallah, the Episcopal Church, St. Andrew's in Ramallah. And on Friday, we'll be having a theological discussion, dialogue with many notable speakers, including Naim Atik, Mundar Ishaq, and many others within the conversation, talking about justice, faith, and trying to change the situation. So please tune in for those events as well. Next week, we will be having Dr. Hatim Bizian from Berkeley University. Will be discussing also the issue of Islamophobia. It was touched today by Professor Slabotsky presentation, but we will also be having that discussion for Kumi next week. Yeah, and with that, I would like to thank you again and wish everyone a good rest of day, whatever you'll be doing, and continue being in solidarity and working for justice. All right. Goodbye, everyone.